everyone, and welcome to another HSA webinar. So as you know, we always talk about how to have a successful business, how to make your business grow, how to scale up, how to get more clients. But what happens when you actually grow, when your business grows and you have more clients and have lots of clients and lots of projects to look after, and you need to start thinking about hiring staff to help you manage all the pipeline. So yes, that's why we're here today. We're going to talk about the other side of the business when you actually need to start hiring people to help you out. So it's important to understand the human resources implications around recruiting. And I know that there are several small businesses and one-man bands and one-woman bands, right? that wouldn't even know where to start if they have to hire someone. If it should be a part-time person, a freelance person, or maybe a zero-hour contract situation. So there's so many implications around all of that. And you need to make sure as well that not only you define which way is the best way, but also to ensure that you follow a set process for interviewing. I mean, how are you going to find the right person? How do you even, what are the right questions to ask? And how do you know that the answers are the right answers for the role as well? You also need to make an informed and objective decision around that, and make sure that people have the necessary right to work documentation for the UK, which is very important as well. So the HSA has partnered up with the Home of HR to give you the do's and don'ts on hiring employees for your staging business. And today we're going to talk to Alice Hosker of the Home of HR about recruitment to induction, how to get your best people in. So Alice has worked in both the public and private sectors for over 11 years. And most recently, she worked for a shared local authority in Hampshire for a number of years, covering everything from straightforward day-to-day human resources queries such as absence management, employee conduct, underperformance, to large reorganizations and implementing talent management processes. Alice, I know you've been helping some HSA members already. We've got some people that have looked for you to have some sort of advice and to see what the next steps for their businesses when it comes to recruiting. And I know you can help a lot more people because staging is booming, and all the HSA members I know are growing and getting to the next level in their businesses. So yeah, let's see how you can help. Let's get right to it. Welcome.
Brilliant. Thank you, Paloma. Thank you for the introductions. Sorry about whatever's been going on with my screen. I'm not quite sure. It's having a little moment. But hopefully it's here.
It's good. It's good now. It should be fine.
I think it just thought you wanted to do a little dance. Yeah, thank you. It's really great to be here, and it's such a tricky subject, this, and it's one that many people don't really think about, the consequences of doing the wrong things, or how things should be done properly. And I've been dealing with a lot of clients and businesses recently that have just started to take on their first employees, or businesses, that have been set up straight away and need to take on employees straight away. So if you think of businesses in the hospitality sector that are getting back to reopening, that have needed to take staff on straight away, a lot of them don't know how to go about recruiting people in, getting people in, what you're looking for, what should I do, what should I not say. So I thought it would be really worthwhile doing a webinar to support you all as well, to kind of get to know, like Paloma says, the tips that, what not to do, what to do, about hiring people in, and also getting the best people in. You want the best people. You've got your business that you've grown. You want the best people to support you in that. So we're going to talk about how the best ways to do that are, and what you need to follow, what the processes are, and the best ways to get the most fantastic people into your business.
Fantastic. So Alice, I'll leave it on to you. I'm going to turn my video and my microphone off. If you need anything, I'll be here. But yeah, let's crack on. I can't wait to see all about it. Thank you, Alice. On to you.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm just going to start with just some objectives of what I'd ideally like to get through in this webinar. So we're going to look at what the hiring process is. How do you start that? What does that mean? What do you need to get in place first? What steps form part of that process? So, you know, what do you have to do first? What comes last? What do you really need to remember? As an employer, which you will then become, you know, if you're taking on your first employees, that's a massive step, and congratulations, because that's really exciting. So what do you need to remember now being an employer? As you can imagine, there's a lot of legalities around, there's a lot of employment legislation in place, and that's really to protect both you and the individuals that you have working for you. Leading on to the next point, any legal implications when hiring. You know, there's a lot of things around discrimination. You need to be very hot on the notes that you're taking when you're interviewing candidates. There are certain things that you should absolutely not say. Some would say that's common sense, but a lot of the time it's not. And there's a lot of people that do trip up on things that they say. So we'll talk about that. What do you need to provide when you're offering a job? Surely that's straightforward, but you know, there are things in place that you need to make sure you do, and by certain times as well. What should you be mindful of? What is an induction process? So not only are you going to be recruiting somebody into your business, but it doesn't just stop there. That's the start of their career with you. That's the start of their journey with you. It's all about getting the right people in and then engaging them through the whole of their career with you. So that's a really important part. And how do you create a great candidate experience? Now, this is candidate and employee. I've seen a lot of poor recruitment processes in my time. I was even out walking somewhere this morning and I could hear a couple of ladies who said that one of them had applied for a job. They'd not been contacted, the job had now disappeared and they don't know what's happened to it. So that's an example of a really poor process. You need to have steps in place to make sure that you're covering all bases. So they're the points that we're going to cover today, and hopefully you get a lot of answers to some of these questions. So where do you start? So you have a role that you need to recruit to. You've identified that you can't do it on your own anymore, or perhaps 2, 3, 4, however many of you are there in the business already, you need an extra pair of hands. So what do you do? Firstly, you need to identify what you actually want from that job. So again, you know, I've seen so many times where businesses have either re-recruited for a current job that exists already, or want to recruit for a different job, go out to advert for it, but don't actually really know what they want from someone. So they've gone down the interview process and haven't got anywhere because actually they didn't put enough thought into what they actually want from that job at the end. So it's really important to start thinking about what you actually want from that role. What will entail? What sort of person do you want? On that point, we need to be very careful because you can't discriminate against certain individuals. You can't discriminate against anyone, but there are certain things called protected characteristics that protect certain individuals. For example, if somebody has a disability, if somebody is pregnant, if somebody has just come back from maternity leave, there are a huge array of things that fall under the protected characteristics category. So just be mindful of that. If you don't like somebody, just please be very careful about the notes that you're making. You absolutely can take someone on because you think they'd be a really good fit, but you need to mold them a little bit. Absolutely fine. You know, I've worked with someone, I've recruited someone in an administrator's post before, didn't quite have the right experience, but she was a great fit for the business and she went on and she flew and she's now doing really well in another role. So you can recruit someone because they're a good fit. You can reject someone because they're perhaps not a good fit. It's all about how you communicate that and write that down and make those notes. So be very clear on what you want and what you're looking for. What experience do they need? What skills do they need to have? If you need someone to come in that's got some, building experience, because you may need someone to put together a lot of the equipment or staging bits that you have, make sure that you've got that in place and make sure you know that that's what you're looking for, because you wouldn't want to be in an interviewing a really good person for a job that actually isn't great for them because you've not communicated properly in the job description what you're looking for. So be very, very clear on that. And, you know, I'm not saying it has to take a long time to put that job description together, but you do need to give some thought to it. Clear and concise job descriptions, you know, don't waffle, don't make it all fluffy, straight to the point, what you want, what the job will carry out, what responsibilities that person will have, and what experience, skills, knowledge that person will need. So be very clear, very to the point. It's always good to take advice or get a second opinion, even if it's a partner, a friend. Can you have a look over this? Does this make sense? Would it attract you to the role? Do you know what it's asking for? Always get advice on what you're putting out there, because you want someone that's going to do well in your business, and you want someone that's going to be good for your business. Make it easy for people to apply for the job. You've got this great job that you want people to apply for. Where are you going to advertise it? Do you know where to put it? Would you share it just online? Could you put it on your social media platforms? You know, it's all these things that you need to think about in terms of where you're going to put it. How easy is it for people to apply? And when I say that, I mean, are you going to ask them to submit some very lengthy application form, which does, if I'm honest, put a lot of people off, because people don't have time to do that. You know, the last year, I think a lot of people have stepped back and, you know, are taking time for themselves. However, they're not going to want to sit down and go through a 2-hour application process. So think about the job that you want and how you think you're best going to get the best candidates through, in terms of, do you just want somebody to submit their CV and a covering letter? If you do, make sure you're very clear on what you're looking for, because it is a little bit harder to get out of a CV and covering letter what people have, the skills and experience they have. But if you make it very clear that you need them to relate to the job description, then that would be absolutely fine. Make sure you're communicating early on. Now, as a small business, you're already dealing with a lot. You're already a finance person. You're already an expert in marketing. You're already potentially trying to do the HR. You won't have time to do everything. So I would suggest, when you're looking to recruit somebody, make sure that you've got a plan in place. And part of that plan is communication. And actually quite a lot of that plan is communication. And for anyone that's worked with me before or has been on any of my other webinars through COVID, you will know that I always talk about communication. You cannot over communicate. And this is the start, potentially, of someone's journey with you. You want to get across to this person that your brand, your company, your business is really good. It's well above the rest, and you communicate constantly with individuals. I cannot stress it enough. If somebody is not successful straight away, tell them. You don't have to give them feedback and go into, you know, huge amounts of detail, but just make it very clear to them that they've not been successful, but thank you for applying. It's very easy to do. It takes 2 minutes. If you draft an email to send out straight away to somebody, it won't take you that long, but it's so, so important to do that and start that message early. Be very clear with somebody or a group of people that you are interviewing what's expected in that interview. Is it just an interview? Is it just with yourself? Is there going to be anybody else there? Do they need to prepare anything? Do you want them to do a presentation? Do you want them to do something quite creative? You might potentially want to set up a room and get them to come in and, you know, move things around, set up this. Can you stage this room for me? You know, that's a great idea. Some of you probably already do that, but if you don't, then what a great way to show you and to demonstrate to you what skills, knowledge they have of the job that you're offering and the job that they're applying for. Again, coming back to communication, let unsuccessful candidates know that they have been unsuccessful. I'm sure many of you will have been in a recruitment process before, will have been applying for jobs and will never have heard back. That's really demoralizing and really disengages people. And I think if you think about a time when you've been in that situation, you then completely disengage with that company. And that's not what you want to do, especially if you're a growing business that wants to get their brand out there. Make sure that you do have that draft email to send, that even if it just says, really sorry, you've been unsuccessful at this time, thank you for your time. That's all you need to say. If someone comes back and asks for feedback and you have the time to do it, then do so. If you don't have the time, pop something together and just relay that back to them. Again, I cannot over communicate, and I cannot stress that enough. Give feedback, ideally, yes, it'd be great if you can give feedback. If you've got a job that 100 people have applied for, and I have a client in the interior design industry, and they had a staggering amount of applicants for administration role, they wouldn't have had the time to go back to feedback to everyone. So it's really down to you how you feel is best to feedback, how many applicants you have for a job, how many people you interview. And on that, actually, I would just stress, if you've got a position that you're recruiting to, really try and break it down to a maximum of 8 people that you interview. You don't really want to make it any more than that, because it's your time. And you're going to have to sit down with that person and interview them and ask them, series of questions, set up a staging room. You don't ideally want to do any more than 8, so just bear that in mind. And keep in touch with promising candidates. So you might have a really great recruitment process where you've got 5 out of 7 people that are really great, and you're really stuck in terms of, God, how does this leave me? Who do I choose? And it comes down to that X factor moment where you're going to have all their applications out in front of you, and you really need to make that decision. There is no harm in you keeping back CVs or application forms or information. You can do that for 6 months. You can ask them if they're happy for you to keep their details and to contact you if anything else comes up. Why let good people go when you can potentially get back in touch with them in a few months' time, especially if you are a growing business and you will be expanding and you know that you might need an extra pair of hands? Keep them in your back pocket. You never know when you might need them. Hence the reason for communicating as much as possible, because if you go back to them in a few months' time, they'll know that you're a good communicator. They'll know that you're a good business to work for, because you will keep that constant conversation going. So there's absolutely no harm in keeping people back that might be good for the future. So that's a lot to take in terms of where do you start. Some of your minds might already be blown already, but it's really important. The main points: communicate all the time. Look back over what you actually want from the job. Put that down in writing in the form of a job description. If you get stuck, I'm very happy to look over anything that you put together or give you some pointers initially on where to start. So main take-froms from that slide, and I hope that helps a little bit in terms of where do you even start with recruiting. What do you want from the role? I've gone into detail on some of these points, and I wanted to expand a bit more on these. What do you really know what you're looking for? What do you want? It comes back to that point that I made about, you could have an idea of what you want from a role, but actually when it gets to the interview process, you've got someone that's applied for the job that they think that they could apply to do and probably can, but in your mind that's not what you want the job to do. So it's really important to be clear in your expectations. Is there somebody in the business that already does this? Is there somebody that could take on part of the role? Do you actually need to recruit to another job? It's all about giving that initial first thought and not rushing into it, because that's really important. You don't want to be in a position where you've gone through all this time planning, and then at the end of it you think, oh, actually so-and-so could do that. And you've wasted all that time because you haven't planned it, you haven't thought it through properly at the start. So that is why planning in this part is so, so important. And understanding how it will actually support the business. How will you move the business forward? How will this position move the business forward? How do you see it fitting in? What are your expectations of this job? Job descriptions, talked about it already. Don't waffle on, make it concise, make it to the point. There are hundreds and hundreds of examples on the internet of job descriptions. I have a job description template, so if you're really stuck and you don't really know where to start, please feel free to get in touch and I'll happily share it with you. But there are some jobs that you could potentially look at and think, oh yeah, that those experiences, those skills, that knowledge, that'd be really good for this job. I'll use that. That's absolutely fine to do. You need to start somewhere, and it's good to have some sort of template. So just make sure you really know what you want from the job and keep it very, very clear. A lot of jobs that are advertised, sometimes through Indeed, for example, don't always have the salary on and don't always have the work location on. Work location now may not be such an issue, but for you guys it will be, because you'll need people there. You'll need people to go in and stage, you know, properties. So please do put on salaries. You might have had conflicting advice in the past about whether you add salaries on or not. My advice would be to yes. Would you go into a shop, and obviously some shops don't have prices on everything, but would you go into a shop and buy something all the time that didn't have a price on it? Your answer would probably be no. So why would you apply for a job that you don't know how much they are willing to pay? So definitely put the salary on, because you will attract more people and you will get a better caliber of candidates. We've said make it easy for people to apply. Where are you going to place it? Where are people going to find this job? How easy is it going to be for people to apply? You know, there might be some agencies out there that can help you. I've had a call with a member previously who has been trying to find somebody, but there are no specific agencies for the industry at the moment. But there may be other businesses out there, other, you know, general recruitment agencies that have people on their books that are what you're looking for. So do a bit of research before, find out where and who can help you advertise this role. Make sure you've got it in the best place. Advertise it for as long as you want to. You know, I would suggest within your plan that you do at the start, make sure you've left enough time to actually advertise the role. You don't want to be stuck in a position where you've only got time to advertise it for a week, because you're not going to get enough people through the door. So make sure you've built that into your plan, and make sure that the deadline is very clear, so that people know that they have to get their applications or CVs in by a certain point. Communicate. And I chose this quote at the bottom because, like I say, if anyone's worked with me before, they'll know that I am very much on communication. You cannot over communicate, even if, and slightly unrelated to this webinar, but even if you have nothing to update people with, people would rather hear that than nothing. So even if you're in a lengthy recruitment process and you don't have anything to update somebody that's waiting to hear from you on, tell them that. Just say, look, really sorry, it's taking a little bit longer, but we will let you know as soon as we can. People would much rather that than just be waiting in the balance, because you might also lose them. They might also then apply for something else, and then you've lost a potentially great candidate. So always keep them up to date, especially if the process is taking a bit longer than what you had first thought or hoped for. We talked a little bit around being a small business and potentially not having the time to communicate with people. Can you get somebody to acknowledge, you know, receipt of applications? Can you do an automated message? Can you get an automated email out on the back of an application? All these things will really help with the communication part. And you may think that it's a minor part in the process. It's a really important part, because at the end of the day, when somebody comes in to be interviewed, you're going to communicate with them. So actually, it's a really important part of the process. So just please, if nothing else, if you don't take anything else away from today, make sure you communicate and make sure that that is part of your plan and part of your process. What's expected in the interview? So I mentioned, you know, what are you going to expect them to do? What do you want them to do? You might have done it before, and you might have a series of questions that you run through. Absolutely fine, but just look over those questions, because it may be that you're advertising a different role, so some of those questions might not be appropriate to ask. You want to ask very open questions. You don't particularly want to ask closed questions, which might seem common sense, and a lot of you might be thinking, yeah, well, that's obvious. But I have been in interviews on both sides of the table where I've been asked a number of closed questions, and you know, it doesn't give. If it was me on the other side of the table, I would expand on those points. But from the interviewer, if you were interviewing someone that would just give you a closed question, that's not going to give the interviewer enough detail and information to make a decision. So make sure your questions are very open. Make sure they're specific to the job. You know, don't ask them random things. You know, what's your favourite film? You might want to, you know, that might be a bit of an icebreaker. That's fine. But in order to determine who's the best person for this job, you need to ask some very specific questions about the job role. And then, you know, the more you ask, the better idea that you get of how well that person can do the job and how well they will fit in with the business. So just again, it's another part of the planning. Make sure you've got your questions. If you're not doing all questions, make sure you've got your scenario set up properly, and make sure that they know that, because the last thing you want is for someone to come into an interview that actually you've set up part of the interview to be a staging process. They might want to prepare, they might want to have some ideas in their head, they might want to do some research if they've been out of the industry for a while. Make sure that they know that. And it's very simple to pop that all on an email, letting them know the time, the place, who's going to be in the interview and what's expected of them. You may also want them to bring in certain documentation to that interview. So if you need someone that's got particular qualifications, there's no harm in asking them to bring in proof of their certifications for those. You might want to ask them to bring in their right to work. We'll cover that later on, but that's a really important part of getting people in the business, and Paloma alluded to it earlier on. So there might be certain documentation that you want them to bring in. Again, pop that on the email when you're inviting them to interview. On the bottom of that slide, you'll see I've popped a note on there about anticipate candidate questions. Now, I'm sure, again, many of you will have been in this situation where you've been for a job interview and you will have some questions ready. Make sure that you are ready for those potential questions. So, you know, you could have, what's the start date? Are there any other benefits? Who will I be working with? What training will I get? What's the future look like for the business? Make sure and I'm sure you will have, but make sure you have some answers ready, not even prepared, but in the back of your mind, so that you can feed that back to those candidates. Again, that will help with your employer brand and your reputation as a good business, knowing what you want from somebody. Again, you know, we've spoken about communicating with unsuccessful candidates. Don't take the easy route and just not go back to them. That's not very professional. You wouldn't like to be treated like that. And I always say to clients, put yourself in an employee or a candidate's shoes. How would you like to be treated? How would you like to be fed back to after a job interview? Don't just say nothing, because that's not very kind. And actually, again, comes back to your employer brand. People talk, and I've got a point on that later. People will talk to their friends, their family, people they see. You want your brand to be high up on that list of recommendations. So make sure that you do feedback in some way. It doesn't have to be tailored, doesn't have to be specific to them. Just make sure that you are doing some sort of feedback. It might be the end of the process for them. Make sure that if you are telling them and you are feeding back, you're doing that within good time. You don't want somebody to be told 2 weeks after their interview that they've been unsuccessful, because by that time they will have assumed that they have been. And again, like I said at the start, they'll be completely disengaged with the business. And that's not a position you want to be in, especially if you did think they were good and you want to keep them on file. They may not want you to. So timings are everything with this. Give feedback. You know, feedback is a hard one, and a lot of people struggle because they want to be positive, but that's very difficult if you don't have a lot of good things to say, which, you know, a lot of you will have been in a situation where you might have interviewed really rubbish people, let's be honest, and you want to find a constructive way of feeding that back. Just plan it out and try and be as constructive as you can be. So if someone turned up very scruffy looking, you could feed that back to them and say, we're a professional business, you know, first impressions are everything. We would have hoped that you would have come dressed more appropriately for the interview. That is part of one of the reasons why we have chosen for you to not go through and be successful for the role. So it is difficult and it is hard, and a lot of people do struggle to give feedback well. Again, if you want a second pair of eyes over potentially feedback that you've written down, or if you want to run something past someone, you know, I'm here, very happy to have a chat through and talk you through how it's the best way to communicate that to people, because it is difficult, and, you know, people that have been doing it for years still find it difficult to give feedback. And again, as I said about a lot of these points, it comes back to your employer brand. If you're constructively giving feedback, people will remember that, and people will really value that. If you do have people that you want to keep in touch with, just make sure, and I did mention it earlier, but make sure that they're okay with that, because there's data protection guidelines that were updated a couple of years ago. So GDPR, which you will have all heard of, I imagine. You need their consent to keep their information. So you can only keep their information for 6 months, but as long as they're aware of that and as long as they're happy with that, that's absolutely fine. You might think that in your plans of growing the business, you already know that there's a potential job that they could do. So it's really important to let them know that, because if they don't know that, then they'll go on to look somewhere else, and they won't be expecting something from you. So keep in touch with them, and just keep them up to date on where you are as a business and your next recruitment moves. Because if they know that people or you are looking for potential new roles in the future that they could be good for, they might hang on a little bit and they might wait for that call. So just make sure that they know that and they're fully in the picture. And make the whole experience for them memorable in the good way, not in a bad way. You don't want to have gone through for an awful process where they've not been kept in touch with, the interview was terrible, you didn't know what you were doing, it was very disorganized. That's not the process, that's not the candidate experience that we would want them to have. We want them to come in, be very up to date, know exactly what's expected of them, had a really great interview, been communicated with, had really good feedback, great. They are going to go on and say, oh, talk to their friends and family, I didn't get the job, but they were really great in feeding back to me, had a really great process, had a really great interview, really gutted that I didn't get the job, but if anything comes up with them in the future, I'll definitely look out for them. That is what you want people that have been unsuccessful in interviews to say to their friends and family, because it's not only about the interview, but it's about the business. And people are always selling houses. I know it's very unsure about what's going to happen post-June, but people will sell houses still. There may be a dip, but people will still want to and need to. So they will always look to you, or recommendations for businesses that can come in and potentially stage their property. So people talk, bear that in mind for when you're interviewing and through this whole process. So you've been through the interview process. You've got your successful person or people, if you're lucky enough to recruit more than one person. What do you do now? This is the time that is really going to be important. So everything before, great, really important. Make sure it's a great experience. Make sure it's memorable for the right reasons. This going forward is really, really important. You might have somebody that you're offering a job to that won't start with you for 1 or 2 months because of other commitments or other jobs, notice periods that they can't get out of. Just because they might not be starting with you for a couple of months, keep in contact with them, because it might be that if they think they're really disengaged, or you're really disengaged with them and you haven't kept them in touch, haven't kept up to date with them, they might retract and they might think, oh, do you know what? They're not really engaging me. They don't really keep me up in the loop about what's going on. I'm still waiting for my contract for them. I'm still waiting on this. They might retract and then not take the job with you. So this is really important. Again, timing is everything with this. So first steps, offer them the job. Really exciting. Hopefully they accept. Verbally offer it to them and kind of give them an overview of what that offer means. So we want you to start on X day. This is your salary. This is where you'll be starting, and this is what we're anticipating. You don't have to go into everything now, because that can come later in either the contract or further conversations with you. But make a verbal offer to them. Then you would issue them with an offer letter and ideally their contract of employment. This is really important because you'll see on the slide that as of last year, so the 1st of April 2020, the employment legislation changed. Every employee now has to have an employment contract by day 1 of their employment with any business. If you're audited and you have individuals that are employed with you that don't have contracts, you could be fined, and that's not a situation you want to be in. So make sure they've got an offer letter, make sure they've got their contract by day 1. Again, I'm here to support, can guide you through what contracts are best, what you want them, what hours they're going to be doing, etc. If they don't have at least an offer letter, they'll probably be reluctant to resign from their current job. So make sure that at least you have an offer letter going out to them so that they know that the position is theirs, so that they can then resign. Ensure that at least Ideally, 2 references are taken. Again, this depends on their experience. They may have only worked somewhere for a few years prior to or after them leaving university or coming out of college or whatever. If there is only 1 reference to get, then there's only 1 reference to get. But ideally, you would get 2, just so that you know you've got 2 really good references behind you. Frustratingly, some businesses still only provide dates of employment and job title. It's not really going to give you a lot, but if you've got a really great candidate coming through, their previous employer might want to give them a shining reference. So you might get a little bit more, but don't be surprised if when you receive a reference, you only get their name and their job title that they did, because that can, that is okay. People are able to do that. You absolutely have to carry out a right to work check for them. So I mentioned earlier on about potentially doing this at the recruitment stage, getting them to bring their passport or birth certificate in. They are the only 2 pieces of form of ID that you can legally check. If you don't check their right to work, again, you could be subject to a hefty fine if you're audited. This is really important. This protects you, because if you have someone coming into the business that doesn't have the relevant right to work checks or relevant right to work in the UK, you're employing someone that shouldn't be here. So that's why it's really important to do that. There is a certain process that you go through, but it's very simple. You take a copy, you sign it to say that it's the right person. You need to have their document in front of you. If it's a passport, you need to see them physically to check and verify that they are who they say they are. It sounds over the top, but it's really important, and I would hate for you to have a hefty fine because you've not followed that step. Having references and right to work checks can be conditional offers, can go into the offer contract of employment. So the contract of employment could be subject to satisfactory references and right to work in the UK. If somebody doesn't have either of those, there's a bad reference that's come back, or they don't have the right to work, that offer is then rejected. That's why it's really important to get it in the contract. So they're really important points that I would really ideally like you to remember. Hopefully, this video will be saved and the slides can go out so you can look back on it, but do really bear that in mind, because these are really, really important parts of the process. So you've done that, you've got the offer letter out to them, they're starting with you, they've handed in their notice, they're good to go. Next, we move on to the induction. What does this mean? You probably think, well, that's okay, I just get them in the business and then they start with us and then they get on and do the work. That is what they do. If you want to keep them, there are certain things that would make you a great employer to do. So going through some of these points, I wanted to highlight some statistics to you, which I thought were quite interesting, because it makes it very, it's good food for thought, I think, which highlights why the induction process is so important. So employees who undergo an effective onboarding process can reduce new hire retention by 82%. That means you've got an employer who's got a great process to getting that person in the door that makes them feel valued, makes them engaged, keeps them up to date with what's going on in the business. They are 82% more likely to have a successful employee stay with them and a successful onboarding process. So I think that was this really interesting statistic that just kind of stuck, and I thought it'd be really worthwhile sharing with you. When you look to recruit into new posts, the average employee that you're looking at will cost between 16 and 213% of their annual salary, obviously depending on their pay. So an average employee exit costs between those percentages. The hire of that is obviously huge. And if you think about the time, the money, everything that you put into recruiting, why then let that go just because you haven't got an effective induction process in place? So important, it really is. And getting these things in place, which we'll talk about in a minute, are really key to keeping that person engaged and wanting them to stay with you as an employer. 8 in 10 employees would seek a new job after one bad day. They come in on day 1, day 2, day 3, they've had a really bad onboarding process. I don't like that word. I hate the word onboarding, but they've had a really bad induction process. They don't feel engaged. Whoever's looking after them hasn't had the time to spend with them. They've not had a proper plan in place. They don't know what's expected of them. Why would they stay? They're disengaged, they're demotivated, they don't feel valued. They'll leave. That's not a position you want to be in, and that's a huge amount. So that, just bear that in mind as well. Following on from this, you've offered to the successful person. Oh, sorry, I've gone in the opposite direction then. Apologies, I thought something had gone wrong. So on the last statistic then, 77% of companies focus on employee experience to increase retention. And there's a really interesting statistic that I put into the last article that went out to all the HSA members. It came from the CEIPD, but it was a quite high statistic, a number of businesses that are focusing on their induction process now to ensure that they do retain the best people that they get in through the door. It's not just about having a great candidate experience in the interview process, it's also about having a great experience throughout their induction process. And I mentioned in that article that went out that an induction process really should last for about 12 weeks. That gives you time to find out who they are, what they're all about, gives them a chance to find out who you are, what the business is all about, what's expected of them. You kind of can gauge if they're enjoying it, if they're, having a good time. That's why so many businesses now have stepped back and thought, actually, we really need to put some consideration into this. We really need to make this valuable to people, make sure that people are really on board with this. So I thought those few statistics there were quite interesting, and some are just good to highlight to you to really explain that actually it is really important to have a good induction process. You don't want to be one of the statistics of somebody that leaves your business after 2 or 3 days because they've had a poor induction. It's just not ideal. And I appreciate that, the fast-paced environment that you're working in may not lend itself well to having a great induction process. As long as you've got things in place to support that new person, they know what's expected of them, you're already on to a good start. So I'm not saying you have to get a really lengthy process in place. Just make sure you've got the key bits in place to support them in their new role. They are key. Effective inductions are really important. They are mutually beneficial for both you and the individual. Like I say, you get to know who that person is. It helps during their probation period. So not only do you have the induction process, which helps onboard them, but it also helps to kind of get an idea as to whether they will be successful. Now, in the contracts that I have, I will always suggest that you have a probation period in there for at least 6 months if it's a permanent job. That may sound like a long time. It's average. 6 months is a good period of time to have a probation period in for. That enables you to identify if they are the right person to do the job, if they can carry it out for the long term, and it enables that individual to identify if it's something that they want to do going forward. Really important. Need that in place. I would suggest if you don't have probation periods in place, then get them, because it is key. The new individual will feel more engaged, and I've talked about motivation. People want to feel motivated. If you think about a new job that you've been in, you want to come in and feel really excited about coming into the job and having all these great, new things to learn about, and really getting your hands in and getting stuck into staging, whatever is part of your business. You want them to feel really motivated and really engaged and really excited to come in. Make sure that you've got all those steps in place and you've planned out what they will be doing in the first couple of weeks, because that will be really key to keeping them going forward. And you'll be less likely to lose them to a different organisation. You don't want to be a statistic, like I say, of a business that's lost somebody in the first few days because they didn't have a great start. And that's, that is all down to planning. If you can plan it out, then it will save you long term in the process. You don't want to go through another long recruitment process, which again is going to cost you time and money. And as it quite rightly says there, 8 out of 10 employees who leave organisations are new employees. 8 out of 10. So for that's a staggering amount of, you know, people that leave a business that are new to a business. I've seen it a lot of times in teams that I'm not surprised have been left because they don't have the right plans in place. They haven't thought through this process. They really need to understand what is going to be key for this person coming in. So planning, again, is really, really key. It will save on time and money. It will save on time and resources. You know, it's so important to have a good induction process in place. It gives you, and actually this is a really great opportunity for you as business owners because you're in the creative industry. So it gives you the opportunity to put an induction process together, showing this new individual or this new employee what you can offer throughout the induction process. You're not just going through a tick box exercise. You're not just going through a checklist saying, yeah, we've done this, we've done this. Show your creative side. What can you do to make it a really good process for them? It's going to be an anxious time for them. So anything to, you know, make them feel engaged, motivated, part of the team, part of the business, you know, use your creative energies because I know that you will all be very, very creative. Otherwise you wouldn't be where you are. Also, the better the induction process, the more effective, the more efficient the employee will be. You've got someone that's fully equipped, up to date, got all this knowledge behind them, all this training behind them. What more could you want? They're ready to go. They are ready to do the job that you've asked of them, and to a potentially high standard. So make sure that you have all of that in place because it will be really, really important. And having, you know, someone there that is going to feel that they're getting the support and they're feeling valued is again really important. So make sure you have the time to put into this. If it's not the right time to recruit, then I would say just take it back right to the start and set out your plan because planning is key. And if you haven't got enough time to do it properly, then don't do it yet. Make sure you've got enough time to do that. What to include in an employee induction? So I've alluded to it a little bit, but these are the sort of things that I would expect to see in an induction. Have a welcome pack ready. So you might have sent out a welcome pack as part of their offer letter and contract, but you might want to welcome them with something else when they join. A notepad, a pen, tape measure, you know, whatever you think would be good as a good offering to someone coming in, have that in place. Signing of any outstanding paperwork. So someone may have just left, they might not have had their P45, you might need them to do P46 or the new variation of that form. They might not have filled in their relevant pension forms if they need to do that, and if they're eligible to go into your pension scheme. Please be aware that if you are just starting to recruit your first employees, you do have to, all of your employees will be auto-enrolled, obviously subject to their personal circumstances. So you do need to sign up to have a pension scheme in place. Do relevant introductions. You know, I've been in businesses before where I've started or I've seen new people come in and join a business and not have a clue who anyone else is in the team or the business because they've not had the opportunity to have those introductions. And you might think, well, we'll just do it as we go along. Great, but that do it as you go along could last for a few weeks and that's not ideal. So do those introductions to start with or put them in the welcome pack. You know, it's nice to have pictures of people and what they do. You know, have that included. Understand what their actual job is. So take the time, half hour, an hour to sit down and go through everything with them and make it very clear what they've signed up to. Because back in the interview, that could have been 1, 2, 3 months ago. They might have forgotten what they've actually signed up to. So reinforcing what their job is, what you're expecting of them, you know, is really important because this is the job that they've come in to do. Set any initial targets you have. You know, you might have KPIs to reach. You might want to go through those with them. They need to be aware of what's expected of them and just make it clear of what's expected when. You know, it's great to set targets, but actually by what point are these targets expected to be met? That's always an issue when I see performance management issues come up. It's because people haven't properly been communicated with. And again, it goes back to communication. Any training? Do they need any additional training to do the job that they've been brought into? It may be something really simple like getting up to date on the systems or getting up to date on a certain process that you have in place, but identifying that first is going to be really important to them being efficient in their job. And health and safety, you know, really important, and I imagine very important for the work that you do. Lifting things, carrying things, moving things around, going to be really, really important. So either you're working from an office or some other location, what do they need to know from a health and safety perspective there? When they're out and about, what do they need to do? Do they need to have any PPE? Do they need to take anything with them to protect themselves? You know, it's all these things that are really important, but they need to be aware of. If they're not told, then they won't do it and they won't be aware of it. And moving forward, continue what you're doing. You know, if you're doing a really great job and you've got a really great induction program in place or induction process, continue on that route. It doesn't stop at the end of the 12 weeks. It doesn't stop at the end of their probation period. That engagement piece is so important. And for those of you that employ people already, you'll know that. For those of you that employ people that are maybe having issues with some individuals, then maybe take this as an opportunity to step back and think, oh, am I talking to them enough? Am I keeping them up to date about what's going on in the business? Do I need to do that more? This individual who's come through that recruitment process is now in the business with you and needs to constantly have that engagement with you. You're their employer now. This is all part of it. Make sure you're keeping in regular contact with them. Make sure that you're checking in. Are you okay? How are you finding it? Yeah, great. And going forward, you know, one-to-ones, appraisals, do it however you feel best works for you and your business. But it is really important to keep those regular checks in. And praise where praise is due. You know, everyone loves a thank you. Everyone loves a good job. You know, saying thank you takes 2 seconds. And I hear it all the time where people feel really undervalued and not appreciated. Had someone said, thanks, you know, you've done a really great job, I really appreciate that. That makes all the difference. It doesn't have to have monetary value. It doesn't have to have anything else associated to it. As long as you do a thank you, it's so much more valued. So if someone has done a good job, keep giving them that feedback. I mean, that's a whole other piece and a whole different webinar for another day, but make sure you are saying thank you and giving praise where it's due. And I added another little statistic in here for that as well. It says it there: employees whose managers consistently acknowledge them for good work can reduce turnover up to 31%. You know, people will leave a job because they don't feel appreciated. They will leave because they've got poor managers. They will leave because they have no direction and no training. It's all part of being a good employer and a good business who looks after their staff. So do keep giving out that praise. Obviously, where it's due, you don't have to give it out all the time. And make sure they never get burnt out. You know, if last year taught us anything, it's to actually take a step back and reevaluate what's important. And I know a lot of people have done that in terms of when they've been looking for new jobs in the last year. But there is also a huge amount of statistics around and research that's been done about the amount of overtime and hours that people have been working just to get jobs done. And it's not good for your health, it's not good for your mental well-being, it's not good for your family life. So as a manager, as an employer, it's your role. You know, you're there to look after them whilst they're at work. You've got a duty of care. Make sure they're not burning themselves out. You know, if they need to be reined in a little bit because they're too keen and they want to get stuff done, great. But they need to think about how that's impacting on their health. Really, really important. That's it from me. I hope you found that useful and I hope you found it interesting. If you had questions about how to start recruiting and how to start, you know, getting that process in place, then hopefully it answered some questions. But my contact details are there. I am around. Please do get in touch if you want any other specific advice. Obviously, as I've said, there's some templates and documentation that I'm very happy to share with you. So please do feel free to pop me an email or get in touch. Thank you.
Alice, that was wonderful. Goodness, I want to do an induction now because it just sounds so exciting and like success rate is so high. I just want to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, who would have thought it was so important? Goodness. And I think that I think for most staging businesses are starting out and maybe they're thinking of hiring their first employee, the whole idea of having an induction might sound overwhelming, and we have that idea that an induction has to be something that only large companies do, but it's not really that, is it? I mean, as you said, if you have like a nice checklist to make sure that you're telling the employee everything that they need to know, all the things that they need to learn, how things work, and how to do their job basically, and what's the best way to be more effective and to integrate with the other employees and the company as a whole. So it's not necessarily something that only large companies will do, right?
Yeah, absolutely not. No, it's really important. And you're right. You think that an induction process or an induction program is this fancy big thing that only, bigger companies have, but it's not. I mean, yes, they probably have really lovely, fancy induction programs, but that doesn't mean to say that small businesses can't do something as well. Have a couple of checklists, have a couple of, a half a day here or half a day there within their first couple of weeks, just to make sure that they've got everything that they need, that they feel that they need to do their job well. And if you want to keep them and retain them, that's going to be really, really important for them. They'll know that they're coming into a small business because hopefully that will have been discussed with them in the interview or however they got the job. But they will expect some form of induction, whether that is a quick half-hour chat or a couple of forms that they need to go through. It's something, but the statistics say it speak for themselves, really.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And I've got a few questions. I always do. Because with staging businesses, there's a lot of hiring contractors or freelancers, and people are always wondering how they should go about that. So should you have a contract with, say, a handyman, or is that something that you can literally just arrange verbally? Or I think even for insurance purposes, for you to make sure that that person is covered by your insurance, if you choose to go down that route instead of using their own insurance, you need to have some sort of contract. You need to have that formalized somehow. How does it usually work when it comes to that? Do you think it's advisable to have some sort of paper that shows that you're connected somehow, that even though you're not necessarily hiring them as an employee, but as a contractor?
Yeah, it's I'm going to give you a really HR answer. It depends. It depends on who you get in. However, yes, I think if you've got that person working for you in some capacity for more than, well, actually for any period of time, definitely needs something in writing, just so that, like you say, for insurance purposes and health and safety purposes, you've got something written down. Definitely, if you've got a freelancer or a contractor in place, you definitely need some sort of agreement, because you want to protect both parties. So having those agreements in place is really, really important. Having people that are very ad hoc, it depends. It really depends what the work is for. They might come in to do an hour's job. You don't really need anything unless there are particular risks to doing that job. Then you might want to just jot something down. But yeah, freelancers, contractors, consultants definitely have agreements in place. Obviously not contracts of employment, but agreements of some sort.
More like an agreement. And this is something you obviously can assist with.
Absolutely.
People look for you, because I think that there's quite a few HSA members and actually stagers and interiors professionals in general that, let's say, they have the go-to handyman or maybe one or two professionals they usually go on a regular basis. And yeah, it's just a matter of seeing what would be the best format for how often they do it and how it works for the company, and what does the job actually entail, if it's risky, if it's not, and if they have insurance, if they're not. So I think, as you said, it really depends on each situation, right? But if you can help people with that, then anyone who's looking for any advice on that, please do look for Alice, because I think that's it's difficult to have a one answer fits all, right?
Absolutely, yeah. It is, it really depends.
Yeah. And another thing that I wanted to ask, and this is more of a personal view on how things have been happening lately. And I think now we're getting back to normal with being able to meet people in person and do interviews in person and all of that. Do you think recruiting will be kind of hybrid as well, with some interviews, say the early stages being done online and then the final stages being done in person? Have you noticed a new trend on how these things will start to unfold from now on?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, actually, and I'm glad you asked it, because I think the world over the last year has realised that not only can you work from home or work remotely, and it clearly works well. Obviously, not for some businesses. I know some businesses have struggled with it, but that mainly comes back to culture and the culture of trust that they have in the organisation. So that's more around trust and their individual cultures. But I think people have really, sort of looked for a different way of doing things. And I think, to save time, to save money, if you can do initial stages of interviews virtually, whether that be over the phone or Zoom, Teams, however they want to do it, absolutely, there's no harm in doing that. The only thing I have seen is that some businesses are a little bit hesitant to do that going forward permanently, because some people like to see a physical person. So you might have somebody, and obviously we've all heard the jokes over the last year of people being really well dressed, from what they can see, but then they might have their pajama bottoms on, like, underneath. So they might want to see, if it's a really professional role that they're going into, or it's a sales type role, they'll want to see that they are properly dressed for the occasion. So yes, absolutely. I think going forward, it will be a really hybrid model of how you recruit. And again, it depends on your business, what sort of process you want to go down, and what sort of professional character, that you want to try.
Yeah, I think that if anyone is looking to hire, say, for a sales role, that it will be someone that will be visiting potential clients and establishing new partnerships, anything that might really require that they are very presentable and well dressed and well mannered. You could obviously do a little bit of a triage by video, by Zoom, by whatever means they choose to, even to make it more efficient as well. Because if it's a waste of time, right there and then, and it was just like one short 10-minute call and that was it. Exactly. But obviously you want to see how that person really behaves and how dressed they are and how they communicate, and some things can only be done in person, right? There's only so much we can do virtually and digitally. And yeah, it will be interesting, actually. I'll be really interested to see over the next few months how many businesses have issues with people that have purely been recruiting because you can't necessarily tell what someone's like. And lots of people have recruited during the pandemic and haven't even met each other yet. And I think now is the time that people are going to start to see if there is really that synchronicity, if people really can work together. So it'll be interesting, hopefully not tragic.
Yeah, hopefully not the latter.
Oh gosh, yeah. Okay, final question, and this should be a fun one, hopefully. Any funny stories of interviews, like weird questions that have been asked or weird answers that have been given? Anything funny that you can share with us?
That's a really good one. I have been in interviews more from how people have come across, where people...
I'll take that as well, yeah.
Yeah, there was one where the individual that came in kind of had the assumption that they'd already got the job without even stepping in the room. So they came in, they sat down, and they were very sort of retracted from the interviewers. So there was 3 of us interviewing. It was for quite a senior level role, and they were very sort of slumped, didn't really care, were giving kind of short answers, which didn't really reflect against their CV. So it was a bit of a shock to see that actually they were just how their mannerisms and how they came across was very negative, and just not what you'd expect from that sort of level of position. So that's more from like a mannerisms type and how people come across. We have had people that have asked what lunch is provided when provide lunch. So that was an interesting one.
That's very picky, right?
And again, like, we all like food. I mean, I love food, but that's not one of the first or even last questions I would ask in an interview.
Yeah, and I wonder if that would be something that would help them to decide or not, right? Because it must have been really important to them.
Yeah, I mean, I get if they were a chef and they were applying for a chef's position, that would obviously be very important, or partly important, but it wasn't at all.
Oh,
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. I'm going to think on that, and then I might
do you know
send
what? Think on that, and I think you should write an article about it, or maybe we can do an Instagram live at some point just to share these funny stories, because I think it's nice to see a lighter side of all of this as well, because it can be quite scary sometimes, whether you're being interviewed or if you're interviewing and going through all of that process from both sides. So it's just fun to look at the other side and have a laugh.
Yeah, absolutely.
Alice, this has been amazing, and I just wanted to say, so you've got your contact details here, so I'm just going to read it out loud. So if anyone needs to get in touch with you, they can write you at alice@homeofhr.co.uk, or they can just go to your website, www.homeofhr.co.uk. What is your Instagram account?
So it's home_of_HR.
Lovely. So if anyone needs to get in touch with you, or maybe just discuss whatever needs they might have with putting maybe a contract in place, or really hiring someone, or maybe starting to build up so they can be ready for whenever they're ready to hire someone. If they want to put everything in place and get prepared, they can obviously get in touch with you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What I also have, what I've introduced very recently, or in the last couple of months, because I've noticed such an increase in new businesses being set up, specifically around Portsmouth and Southsea, is just so many businesses are either starting out new and hiring straight away, or taking on a lot more new starters. So I've actually got a specific pack aimed at businesses that are taking on their first employees.
That's fantastic.
Going through the process again. So yeah.
All right, so we can just get in touch with you, and then you can get it. I think we've got a link to that, but it obviously won't be there forever. But if anyone is catching the replay shortly after this, they can go on HSA's Instagram on our link in bio, little link. We've got the link there where you can access it and download it as well. Otherwise, you can just get in touch with you and you can send it to them, right, Alice?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great stuff, Alice. It's been very helpful. I think there's lots of very useful information that people can use to start taking their business to the next level, and hiring people and breaking free from having to do everything on their own. I think it's a really important step, and nobody will want to just take it without knowing what's the best way to do it. So I'm very grateful that you shared all of this knowledge, all of these tips. And yeah, everyone, if you need any help with HR or anything HR recruiting related, please make sure to look for Alice, or have a look at the HSA website as well. We've got lots of important information there for you to have a look as well, and quite a few articles from Alice as well in regards to recruiting. And I'm sure Alice will carry on contributing as well with useful tips. So there's always something there. So come and look for us at HSA or Alice. And yes, happy recruiting. Alice, thank you so much. It was a pleasure, and I hope to speak to you soon.
Thank you so much. Have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you.